Welcome to the Healthy Anger Toolbox, where we help empower you with anger resilience and help you change to healthy anger response. I encourage you to subscribe to my channel and the podcast as we open up the Healthy Anger Toolbox. Today, my guest is Melanie Wijeratna, and she's out of Toronto. And Melanie and I met as co-contributors to the blog site medium.com. And I read one of Melanie's articles there and was really inspired. She was brave enough to share her story and very courageous to talk about her experiences. And I observed, Melanie, you went through a lot of trauma, and my heart goes out to you for your losses. But I was really inspired by your article in terms of your journey of growth and understanding about your experiences, but also how you've emerged somewhat stronger. So welcome to the Healthy Anger Toolbox.
Thank you very much, Marty. I appreciate it.
So when I initially read your article, I was really inspired by Katy Perry and Wide Awake. She's now on my playlist, and so I was able to go listen to that. But the lyrics of that I know has really connected to your story and your journey.
Yeah, I think it's something that for the last little while, and I want to say like maybe the last month, I've really been thinking about her song from the point of view of the way I experience her song is you go through something tough. You didn't realize it was going to be so tough. You went in maybe with eyes closed, and then you come out of that and you realize that you're still standing, and not only are you still standing, you're soaring. So that's how I feel like about myself these days. I feel like, yeah, I went through some pretty significant, life changes. They happened in a short amount of time, and I look at where I am today and I almost don't recognize myself, and I'm just in a much better, happier place in my life. And yeah, I think my story is about that journey from the anger that I went through, that I experienced, and then the gratitude that I have for myself, that I'm the one who put myself through this journey to get to where I am today. And I think for myself, at least, what I notice is that we talk about gratitude a lot. I don't often notice people talking about the gratitude that they have towards themselves for the choices that we make in our own lives to make sure that we're, making a better life for ourselves and holding ourselves accountable. So I wanted to give a shout out to myself to say I'm grateful for myself for putting myself through this journey and being as happy as I am now.
It seems for you that self-gratitude has helped you heal.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So all the losses that you've been through and your experiences, I tend to understand and really notice how that can manifest itself in angry responses. And
Yeah.
many times we talk about anger as a secondary emotion. It's actually there's an underlying emotion. And you had mentioned how your anger was covering up your feeling of helplessness, and I was very inspired by that.
So, not that I want to spend a lot of time on this, but if you read the article, what I say in my article is that over a period of 16 months, I went through probably about four life-changing events. I lost my father. I lost my baby in a pregnancy loss. My career ended, and also my long-term relationship ended. And again, I don't want to. At this point, I don't want to focus on the details of those losses, but that was a very short time frame to go through four significant life changes. Someone told me that experiencing those types of losses, most people will go through them in a lifetime. And I went through all four in 16 months. So her guidance to me was go slow in life. Like, you really need to take things slow. So I did. And what came out of that was a lot of anger. And for me, what I recognized about that anger is total and utter helplessness, because this was going on through the pandemic. I felt like there was no one I could reach out to who also had gone through what I just went through. Like, it's not like I could go to people and say like, oh, so you also lost your dad and your baby and your career and your relationship at the same time. There wasn't really any of that around me. So I felt isolated, I felt helpless. And how that came out was anger, because I didn't know how else to deal with it. And then for me, what was very crucial, and this is part of why I'm grateful towards myself, is that self-awareness that I was very angry, and I reached out and I got myself help in terms of grief counseling and the support that I needed for really the helplessness of grief, of losing all of those people that I loved and I cherished in whatever form that I lost them in, and for losing an identity that I thought was my identity, you know?
So this has empowered you to take care of yourself, and that
Yeah.
self-care kind of really started to help you feel a bit stronger in terms of making choices and metabolizing the anger and processing those angry experiences and exchanges. So that's the inspiring piece right there. And is it one aha moment? I mean, in terms of the learning and growth, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, no, it wasn't one aha moment for me. It was like a galaxy of aha moments. And really, it boiled down to people. People that ended up showing up in my life after these events had happened. I had a certain expectation back then of like who was going to be in my life to be there for me and support me and etc. And that ended up not being the case. Instead, what happened was I met a number of people who were incredibly kind. That is the number one characteristic I noticed in the people who entered my life. They were very kind people, had a lot of characteristics of like nurture and like a nourishing type of soul, type of character traits, very calm, very quiet, the ability to listen. Even when I wasn't speaking, it's like they were listening to my hurt. Uh, I kept noticing these people everywhere, and they would be very supportive and kind when they didn't need to be. So that's the piece that I really noticed. I noticed that these were not necessarily people who like I knew very well or who I saw on a regular basis, but for whatever reason, it felt like that was their nature. It was their nature to be kind to people in general. And I really started focusing on that because I needed it.
Wow.
I
So it
needed
was
that
surprising.
kindness.
It was surprising to you that all of a sudden people started to emerge and really connecting with them at a heartfelt level, and
Yes, yeah,
that helped seemed to help you feel somewhat safe to be able
yeah.
to share your story and move forward.
And a lot of the time, yes, in some cases, I did share my story. Sometimes I didn't. Sometimes it was just as if they could sense it. I don't know what the case was, but it was just this very strong sense of like, you're okay here. You're okay in my space. And I don't think I'd ever noticed that kind of energy before, but I noticed it at that time and I needed it. I very much needed that kind of care and yeah, nurturing and kindness, a lot of kindness.
It's that shifting point, because a lot of people can kind of get caught in that dark hole, of
Yeah.
everything, all the experiences that they've gone through. And for many people who process their anger, a lot of external stressors and trauma, they
Yes.
tend to blame those things. And then what I'm hearing from your story, Melanie, is how you kind of internalize it, that the strength comes from within. It's an inside game to be able to try to manage all this and move forward.
I feel like to this day, I still actually have not met anyone who went through what I went through that I could compare notes and say, did you go feel the same thing that I went? I've never met anyone like that. What that tells me is that there was nobody I could go to. If there was anyone I would have gone to, he'd already passed away, which was my father. So it was kind of like, okay, well, now what do I do? And so it was the sense of choice of like, okay, I can choose to continue to feel helpless and feel a lot of grief and anger, and I absolutely did feel those feelings, but I don't know, but there was something inside of me that says I don't want to just be that. I want to make a difference. I don't want to live the way my life was before in that type of circumstance that brought on those types of life events. Some of them, a lot of these things you can't control, right? And that's the one thing that I noticed out of this. I couldn't control any of those events happening, which meant that the only thing I could control, and this I learned sort of organically, it wasn't a rational concept in my head. I can control myself, and I can choose how I wake up in the morning and like choosing to get out of bed and like make my bed and go to work and like try for that day and like surround myself with those people who were showing up in my life and focusing on that energy instead of focusing on where I was at that time, which was there was a lot of negative stuff going on in my life, right?
So you were able to stand in your power and really
Yeah.
try not to let the external events define who you are moving forward. that you wanted to be kind of in control of who you are and your identity and who you connect with and how you connect with people.
Yeah, it felt almost like a legacy almost. My father, both my parents, they are people that I have a huge amount of respect for and a lot of love for. And it felt like it would be a dishonor to my father, and also to, I actually had two losses. I had an earlier loss years before to my two daughters if I just stayed small. If I stayed in that level of suffering, I thought, okay, well, I've got to be able to do something that makes this world a better place because they're not here anymore, and I want to make them proud wherever they are in terms of that spiritual world, which like I believe in. Also, it was this sense of like not necessarily strength, but the total opposite. It felt like for the very first time in my life I was the weakest I'd ever been. Like this was, I had no power left. I'm someone who a lot of people consider me to be a very strong character. I have a lot of strength. That's a dynamic that I consistently saw showing up in my life, that I'm considered strong. And so I played into that dynamic of being strong. And this was a time where I didn't have any strength left. I felt like almost everybody I've ever loved in my life was gone, and this identity that I had within my career was gone, and so I felt weak. And it was actually from that place of like feeling just utterly, honestly week that my eyes opened up to a different way of living my life. So my whole concept of strength now has changed as well. It's not necessarily about like the way I understood strength, which is like you have to be like strong all the time and not give in to sadness and anger. Actually, there's a lot of strength in being vulnerable. There's a lot of strength in being kind to people. That's probably the biggest lesson I learned in the last 5 years since all of this happened. I think kind people are the strongest people I've ever met in my
Mm.
life.
And
Yeah.
that's a huge self-awareness moment for many people, I think, that are considered the strong people in their communities and their families and their lives. Showing that vulnerability and being able to
Yeah.
open up and allow people to see your needs. That can be difficult for the people around us, but also for ourselves as well.
Yeah.
Being able to play that role. But your shift to realizing that vulnerability can be a strength, and kindness and compassion can actually boost our strength, is really an amazing part of your journey.
I feel like it's changed me for the better, for sure.
You've really defined the space between pain and suffering. You've gone through the pain and you can't change that, but you're choosing to do something different than suffer.
So like for me, my religion, like growing up, and the religion that I ascribe to now is Buddhism. I grew up as a Buddhist. I thought of myself as a cafeteria Buddhist for the longest time, like just picking and choosing concepts that I wanted. And then when I had all of my losses, I did what a number of people do when they go through grief. They go back to their religion. So I looked for some type of answers from Buddhism in terms of how this all came about. And what I came away with, and what I feel very strongly about now, is my own suffering. It is my choice to whether I want to keep suffering or not. Because I was suffering, it was a very honest feeling that I had, and I have a choice in terms of continuing on in my life, like just suffering all the time, like constantly remembering them and mourning, which I needed to do. And at a certain point in life in Buddhism, you're supposed to like move forward with your emotions. You experience that emotion and then you let it go. And then another emotion comes in and you let that go. And this is how you move through that impermanence of life. That was a very difficult concept for me to hear when I was going through my grief and my loss and my anger. It's like, well, no, I want to hang on to this because I felt like that's the way I would hang on to them, the people that I lost, that I loved so much. And now I'm in a different place in my life where I no longer see suffering as a thing to hang on to love. It's more like wherever those people are that I loved, they are happy and they would want me to be happy as well. And I should be moving forward with my life as well. And that's exactly what I chose to do. I chose to stop myself from suffering by doing my very best to move forward in my life.
You mentioned how you haven't actually met someone exactly who's been through the same experience as you, but others seem to be connecting with your
Yeah.
journey and in terms of building up anger resilience. And so it feels like bringing this to a larger voice and to kind of a larger principled type of thing would be helpful, building up that anger resilience.
That this is my story and this is what I experienced. I can tell you all the emotions that I went through. From a rational perspective, I went through this during the pandemic. And my guess is that almost every person on earth went through some type of loss, whether it was like a physical person that they lost or an identity that they lost or something. There was a loss, there was a change that happened as a result of the pandemic. And so I feel in some way or form, all of us had some version of anger that we experienced during that time. So in my case, never to downplay my own story or to downplay anybody's story, but I'm never going to say my story is the worst that could ever happen to someone. There's somebody out there who went through something however many times worse than what I went through. And I think my hope and my message is to be able to say there is still hope for all of us because all of us went through that pandemic together and we're still here. How do all of us move forward in a way where we are choosing how we want to live our lives and not letting somebody else or some other circumstance or the past define and dictate how we live our lives, right?
Staying in control of that and not letting all the external stuff really control trajectory and destiny and things like that. Just really, really powerful. And you really demonstrate a lot of post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic wisdom, quite frankly, to be able to have the insight and be able to get to some of the positive aspects of your journey. It's that resilience. I really
Yeah.
celebrate and honor your resilience, Melanie.
I also want to say for myself, this is very, very like sincere towards myself. I don't ever see myself as someone who's like completely over my anger. Like I'll never be angry again, and I'm like a super happy person all the time now. I'm not. I still have my days where I get angry. I still have my times where I feel helpless and I feel my grief and my loss. I am pretty sure in my life I'm going to get angry again at some point, maybe tomorrow or in 10 years. I'm sure I'll go through other pretty painful events in my life in my future. And I know now that I do have a choice to how I'm going to be in those future situations, how I want to be as a person. Because yes, I can have a lot of anger and I went through some really terrible things, and I can choose to be the better version of myself. There's a part of me that in Buddhism, we have a concept of like nothingness, which I'm going to butcher the explanation of this. But ultimately, for me, what it meant is if I hit rock bottom, from rock bottom, I can choose whether I'm going to stay or even go worse than rock bottom and be very bitter and resentful and feel like this happened to me and I'm a victim and this is how I'm going to be impacted in my life because of these things, or I can choose to go up and be a better version of myself as a result of all that has happened, right? And so that's the choice that I'm going to make now and in the future, because I'm not perfect. I am flawed. I will have my really bad days in the future. And I hope that I will choose to be the best version of myself even after I go through those not so good moments of myself.
Very humble and very inspiring. And in reading one of your other articles at medium.com, I know you have this four values system and you really want to bring this message out to a larger audience, larger community.
I run my own company, and the concept of this company, I actually came up with it when I was a kid. When I was a little girl, I was like 6 years old. But long story short, this company, and I have particular principles in my life or values, and I have four values. One is happiness. Fun is the second one, kindness is the third one, and then sincerity. This is how I want to be in my own life. I want to be a happy person. I want to be around happy people. I want to share happiness with the world. I want to have fun in my life because I found that I actually learn better when I'm playing or when I'm learning in a fun environment. So I want to be a fun person and be around people who are okay with like constantly learning and playing and growing. I want to be a very kind person because I have seen how kindness has impacted me when I was at my most vulnerable. And I also do firmly believe that the strongest people that we have alive today and in the past have been very kind people. I also want to be sincere. And sincerity for me has to do with boundaries as it relates to anger. After all the growing that I've gone through in the last 5 years, all the grief counseling and support that I received and asked for in the last 5 years, a big lesson I learned is boundaries in terms of who I want in my life, the type of behavior I want in my life, the type of ways I want people to treat me. And then also for myself, like what boundaries do I have with other people? How do I want to show up in the world? How do I want to treat people? What's the energy that I put out into the world, right? Like I said, I'm not a perfect person. I am going to have my bad days. Do I want to stay that way? Is that the energy I want to put out into the world, right? So those values became really important to me after all of my losses. They became really, really central to who I am. And it was almost like as if this choice that I made, that going forward in my life for however long I am on this wonderful earth, I want to be this kind of person. Every decision that I make, everything that my company does, I want it to come from these four principles and these four values because that's the impact that I want to make in the world for the rest of my life. I want this world to be a happier place. I want people to enjoy their lives and have fun. I want to be around kind people. I want to see more kindness in the world. And I'd like people to be sincere with each other and be clear on your boundaries. Like, how do you want people to treat you? How do you want to treat other people? Right.
So if those four values, those four areas that you can be intentional about
Yeah.
trying to build up more of your anger resilience.
One thing I've found, it's been 5 years since all of my stuff happened. I'm actually not as angry as I was before. It sounds surprising when I say that, but that's what happens. Like when you work through these things, for me it was important to release that anger, to talk with someone and get that anger out in a safe and a healthy, almost sacred environment. I think being able to release that anger and then be assertive and clear in your communication with people about how you want conversations to go, how you want people in your life to be around you, that has been an incredibly important lesson for me to learn from an anger perspective. Because one thing I wrote in that article is for me, my anger, what it taught me, I actually gave her a gender. My anger is a her. She was showing me my own boundaries. As in, like, there's a bunch of boundaries that have just been crossed, and I didn't know that. I wasn't aware enough of what my boundaries were. So I've been spending a lot of time learning how to communicate assertively and kindly. This is what I'm okay with, and this is what I'm not okay with. And when I'm not okay with it, I remove myself from the situation or that environment.
That assertive communication is key because many times people will express their anger in aggressive,
Yeah,
passive, even passive aggressive ways,
yeah.
where all the ways that they connect with people and communicate with people has a tinge of their anger, their bitterness, or their feeling of resentment. But for you, it's all about focusing on healthier anger expression and assertive communication, being clear and direct without bringing in a lot of other stuff and emotion can be a lot more effective. I also appreciate what you're saying that by working hard and being intentional, that over a period of time, it does reduce your anger.
I've noticed that I'm not actually around people who who trigger me, right? Like who upset me because I've removed myself from situations like that. I've actually been very, to your point, intentional about the people I want to be around. Which I don't think I was before this. I was a lot more sort of like laissez-faire, like happy-go-lucky. Anybody who wants to talk to me, they can. And now I'm very different. I'm very intentional about who I let into my space because I want kind people around. I want happy people around. If there are things that are going on in someone's life that I'm just not equipped to deal with, I'm able to now distance myself from those situations because I know that, that whole concept of the oxygen mask, like you got to put your oxygen
Mm.
mask on first. That's how I see myself now. I have to take care of myself first before I can help anybody else.
That classic image of self-care with the oxygen
Yeah.
mask. Appreciate that. But also, realizing in terms of your relationships, what are healthy relationships, perhaps what
Yeah.
are toxic relationships or less than
Yes.
healthy relationships, and defining that when you're going through any type of emotional dysregulation can be helpful, because those healthy relationships can pour into us and light us up, yet the less than healthy or even toxic relationship can kind of drag us the other way. And so
Yes.
really being intentional about that. And then what we can control and what we can't control. I mean, ultimately, we have to really make some decisions and even perhaps come to acceptance that we can't change certain things or control certain things, but there are things that we can control, and how to stay focused on that.
Yeah, I think that one is definitely a journey I'm still on. I'm pretty sure I'll be on that journey my
Mm.
entire life. But this whole concept of what are the external factors that I don't control versus what's inside of me, my reaction, my responses to things that I can control. Definitely still a work in progress and probably will be my whole life.
I hear you being very realistic about what this journey looks like. And sometimes healing may take a lot longer than each of us expect. And sometimes it's a lifetime of healing, what we get involved in, who we get connected with, and what experiences are ahead for us. We can't predict or
Yeah.
control that as well. So, Melanie, it's just been so inspiring. And I will encourage people to go read the article. I'll put the link to the article in the show notes. And just in terms of your journey of building up that anger resilience, just speaks to just a part of me that's just so heartfelt. I'm just so sorry for your losses, but so
Yes.
inspired by how you're emerging from that with all the wisdom and insight and the strength that you're showing.
Thank you. I really appreciate that we even connected because for me, when I wrote that story, it was almost like an anniversary event for something that had happened about 5 years ago. And I remember how bad I felt at the time, 5 years ago, how helpless I felt. And so when I wrote that story and you saw it and you picked it up, it was coming from a place of like, look how far I have come. I am so proud of the woman that I am today because I chose not to remain angry. I chose to take my anger and grow from it and become a better version of myself, hopefully, the best version that I can be of myself at this point. I chose to be very intentional about where I am in my life. And I also made this choice to just try and make an impact on this world, right? Like, try and make a difference in this world where people will hopefully hear my story, and if it resonates with them, then recognize how much power they have within themselves. They're not helpless. Whatever has happened in your life, I'm sure it's terrible. I can almost guarantee it's probably terrible if you're listening to this podcast. And I feel like there's a lot of power that all of us have to overcome those situations, even when we feel our most alone and vulnerable and isolated. Just keep looking up because the way I told it to myself when all of this stuff happened, it was like one door closed,
Mm.
slammed in my face, and then 11 windows opened up. And
Wow.
all of this beautiful, good energy came into my life that I needed. I absolutely needed it, but it happened. So I feel like that's what I would say to anyone who's going through a really tough time right now, possibly worse than what I went through. Look for the windows that are opening up right now. One door slammed, yes. Something else has just opened up for you. I can almost promise and guarantee you that.
So inspiring and so motivating. Thank you very much, Melanie Wijeratna. Appreciate you. Grateful for sharing your story.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, Marty.
And thank you for listening to the Healthy Anger Toolbox.